Hello, my name is Olurotimi Osha. I like talking about American presidents, and I also, um, as I expound on American history and touch on elements of U.S. laws, I've also been drawing attention to color of law violations, pivoting on subordination of perjury and fraud on the court, which I've been experiencing in Montgomery County, Maryland, through a malicious prosecution superintended by an abusive process superintended by Judge James Bonifant of Montgomery County Circuit Court, Maryland. I've done videos in which I talked about how I was a victim of a swatting without um, in my home on May 16, 2023, engineered and orchestrated by Montgomery County police officers. And I was assaulted in my home, dehumanized, abused, and then I was actually robbed under color of law. It was an 18 USC section 241 and 242 rights deprivations violations, and of course a 42 USC section um, 1983 malicious prosecution violations. Today, I want to talk about the bias of Judge Bonifant, and how he's been violating a principle of natural justice. Right, natural justice deals with the fairness, the fair process of the law, that it should be impartial, it should be free from bias, it should be transparent and accountable, protecting, the rights of individuals and free from abuse of power. So, you know, I've been, the case has been, it's malicious prosecution, and it's been going on for almost 3 years now. Anybody who's accused of something, right? They have a right, to be heard, right? That's a principle that's in our Sixth Amendment, right? Right to be heard is there's a Latin phrase for it. Of course, I started learning Latin, and there's a Latin phrase for that right to be heard. It's called audi audi alteram partem, right? That's a right to be heard, and of course, there's also part of not that that's an element of natural justice, that you have the right to be heard, and of course, there's the there's what's called reasoned decision, by the decision maker, right? And that the decision maker, who is an impartial judge or tribunal, right? They make valid decisions on reasonable grounds, which are transparent and accountable, right? And of course, in this case, the decision maker would be a judge presiding over the courtroom. Now, we've been going through pretrial procedure, and Judge Bonifant repeatedly has demonstrated a bias and partiality for the police, saying the police who assaulted me without a warrant, right, came into my home, falsely imprisoned me, right, so committing a Fourth Amendment violation. I've done videos saying what the Fourth Amendment is. Committed a Fourth Amendment violation. If we've forgotten the Fourth Amendment, let me recite it again so that we can remember, right? Let's all try and memorize the Fourth Amendment, just like I've done. Now let me recite it from memory. Uh, the right of the people to be secure in their houses, persons, papers, and effects against unreasonable searches and seizures shall not be violated, and no warrants shall issue but upon probable cause, supported by oath or affirmation, and particularly describing the place to be searched or persons or things to be seized. That's a Fourth Amendment, right? So the judge who's police who violated my Fourth Amendment rights, robbed me under color of law, dehumanized me. That's a sexual assault because they removed me in handcuffs in my home, right? No arrest warrant. I'm a law-abiding federal government employee as of that day, May 16, 2023. Dumped me in a hospital, filed false charges, false accusations, everything that's been demonstrated that there was police misconduct. But he said they exhibited excellent excellent policing. These are his claims. So he's shown an impartiality. He's shown a partiality or bias in favor of the police, and the way he's protracted the process and things actions he's engaged in, um, like he's helped the states to actually obstruct evidence, right? To destroy evidence, to suppress evidence, because this was something that my public defender was requesting, from me. She was asking that we should suppress evidence of the police misconduct, and she talked to me how, that the community does not look favorably upon the allegations of police misconduct, even though they're factual, because our job is to prove it, right? Not to pretend, not to sweep things under the rug and pretend that a fantasy exists. We have road cops in Montgomery County. At least road cops came to harass me in my home. And it's my job to actually show that these were road cops. I'm not a criminal. They had no probable cause for coming to my home. Even the emergency evaluation petition that was fabricated, she asked that we should suppress it. How can we suppress it? Because that's supposed to be the ostensible reason they came to my home. And we have been able to prove that it's a fabrication. She's admitted that, there's a court order in Nigeria from the High Court of Justice in Nigeria that my mom got, that Jide fabricated everything he said. So how is it that you're asking to suppress all of these things that will prove my innocence and demonstrate police misconduct just because you're trying to hide that the police did something illegal, right? Violated my rights. So Judge Bonifant has impeded, his actions, his decision making, in the pre-trial process. He's been obstructing justice. He's been trying to coerce me to take a plea bargain. He's been engaging in, he's been supporting acts, facilitating acts to suppress evidence. He's been engaging in acts in witness tampering, for instance, the false incompetency evaluation orders. He was actually suggesting it on February the 2nd, 2026, just a few days ago, right, at a hearing. Even though he said when he did these fraudulent incompetency orders twice already, those state psychiatrists said no, that I don't have a mental illness and I'm competent to stand trial to a scientific certainty, right? Reasonable scientific to a medical certainty, reasonable medical certainty. Yet he was still considering it, looking for all ways to coerce me to accept a wrongful plea bargain, which is actually illegal. That's judicial misconduct. But the state of Maryland has refused to hold him accountable. The law has refused to hold him accountable. And so these are abuses of power by a judge. So one other thing, since the my attorney had indicated that I wouldn't be able to get a a fair jury, right, in the community, um, if I'm trying to place the police in, if I provide evidence that places the police in a bad light, because the community in Montgomery County tends to favor the police, right? It's a heavy law enforcement area or whatever, right? Then it was my right, it's my constitutional right to ask for a change of venue, because the Sixth Amendment protects us, is part, guarantees our right to an impartial jury, right? An impartial jury, right? And so I asked for a change of venue. So I filed a motion for a change of venue. Now, I'd already requested in the past that Judge Bonifant should recuse himself because he has a conflict of interest in the case. The hospital that the police took me to, where they provided a falsified incident reports, where I refused to speak with do a psychiatric evaluation. That's my right. But a quack racist medical doctor from the South, I would never go to a doctor from from South Carolina because hey, if I want to see a doctor, I have my aunt. Fortunately, there are many psychiatrists in my family. I have a good friend who's a leading psychiatrist in America. Those are people I'll go to. Those are part of my, my rights, my constitutional rights. My family, my friends, my family has to be there because my mom has never taken me to a psychiatrist. And I'm a grown man. I'm a middle-aged man. The police came to lift me in my home, kidnapped me under color of law, and then he dumped me in a hospital on MedStar Hospital, where Judge Bonifant is on the board of directors. So he has a conflict, right? That hospital now provided a a falsified diagnosis based on the falsified police report, completely fabricated. Now, for the trial next week, they want to exclude all of that, right? Because other doctors have since said, no, 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 this guy has no mental illness. It's his hospital who gave a fabricated diagnosis, diagnosing what the police said. Because I refuse to actually speak with the psychiatrist. That's my right. And so I've already filed a malpractice complaint against that hospital, MedStar. So because Judge Bonifant has an interest, right, in the outcome, he has a fiduciary or financial interest. He's on the board of directors of a hospital I have an ongoing medical malpractice complaint against. That hospital is associated with a case. He should not, he should recuse himself, but he's failed to do that. And that violates the principles of natural justice. In this particular instance, uh, the Latin phrase is nemo judex in causa sua, right? No one should be judged in their own cause, right? It's about conflict of interest. Judges shouldn't be biased. Judges who have a personal or fiduciary interest in a matter should recuse themselves. So again, I love the Latin. The Latin is nemo judex in causa sua, right? So these are principles that Judge Bonifant has been violating. So he decides he ended up denying the my motion for change of venue, right? And so I'm like, for the record, I just made it known that okay, this is a judge that I actually have an active and pending judicial misconduct complaint against him. He knows that. I've already filed a complaint. I previously filed a complaint against him in 2024 that he should recuse himself. I provided evidence that he's on the board of MedStar, and he didn't disclose this. He was the one who decided it. And I said, okay, because of comments he'd made about the police being excellent policing, he, reprimanding me. And then for a year, he denied my right to speak on my own behalf, violating that principle that an accused person should have a right to be heard, right? So that's the principle of audi alteram partem, right? I have a right to be heard in court because the man who fabricated an emergency petition, that's Jide Wari, who impersonated himself, misrepresented himself as my uncle, hired an attorney on my behalf. That attorney is not going to defend me in a way that's going to, it's going to incriminate Jide Wari or jeopardize Jide Wari's case in any way. He's going to be doing things to defend Jide Wari. So that attorney goes to make a fraudulent misrepresentation saying, well, that I'm delusional, that I don't know what's going on, and so I should not be allowed to speak in court. So I have a law degree. I graduated from George Washington University Law School. So I hold a Juris Doctor. So I know, okay, I need to comport myself properly in court. So I obeyed the judge. The judge said, oh, that the guy said I shouldn't talk. And the judge will be talking at me constantly, asking me, why don't you want to do this? Why don't you want to use your medication? Why don't you want to do anything? And then but he won't let me respond. You say, your lawyer said you can't talk, you shouldn't talk in court, you can't talk, blah, blah, blah. So this was abusive. This was harassing, bullying tactics, gaslighting by the judge. So that's an abuse of power. And, it's particularly concerning. And, so it violates, all these principles of court procedure that's, that the Sixth Amendment protects, right? And we're seeing this, you know, because I went to law school and I was an intern, I was a judicial intern for a judge, ironically, in the same court that Judge Bonifant is, Circuit Court uh, judge, where he's presiding of. He's the administrative judge. I've worked in that court as a judicial intern, right? I was actually sitting I had a desk, you know, in the judge's chambers that I interned for. But that judge was an excellent judge. So, unfortunately, though, I never imagined that I would be a defendant in a criminal case. But it's against the police. So I'm seeing a lot of the abuses of power that some judges, like Judge Bonifant, perpetrate. The basic principle underscoring our laws is rule of law. No man is above the law, right? And it's from the English tradition, the Magna Carta, right, of 1215. That is, excuse me, it started with that not a king is above the law, no judge is above the law. Excuse me. Among the concerns that the founding fathers, that Thomas Jefferson expressed in the Declaration of Independence, he was complaining about the independence of the judiciary because it was controlled by the king. He controlled their salary, their purse. He talked about mock trials that that they held. The unfair process where people were taken away, you know, from their communities to be tried in for you know pretended charges, false charges overseas, away from the communities, right? So that's a reason why we have James Madison puts these Bill of Rights protecting us and for ensuring the fairness and independence, accountability of the legal process, independence of the courts, right? So the Fourth Amendment that deals with the location, right? Your home, maybe the scene of the crime. You can see it that way. The scene of the crime before you get to the courts. How evidence is gathered, the location, the scene of the crime, if it's your home, right? That protect your rights there. The way evidence is obtained, right? The Fifth Amendment, of course, due process, and then and in terms of federal, and then the 14th Amendment in terms of the states, right? Your rights against the states, right? Due process of law. That is, no state shall deprive any person, right, of life, liberty, or property without due process of the law. Which also has the Equal Protection Clause, which says that. You know, nor shall it deny any person of the due process of the laws, right? So these are the protections. And then the Sixth Amendment deals with the courts, right? The court procedure, in the courtroom, what goes on in the courtroom, right? So your right to a jury, right to a speedy trial, right to know your charges, right to an impartial jury, right to and it incorporates those principles of natural justice, as I've stated. Your right to be heard, your right to cross-examine your accusers, your right to obtain a compulsory process of obtaining witnesses in your favor. So the right to a subpoena. The state has sabotaged it's just a few days to my to trial. They sabotaged my obtaining witnesses. I gave witness lists to my attorney a long time ago. Nobody, no subpoenas issued. So a subpoena, like the it's a court order compelling a witness to appear in court. Because if you're asking, if a defendant is asking people, even friends or whatever, who come and testify, in likelihood they'd say no. But if it's a trial, a criminal trial prosecution in which your life, liberty, or property, it's at risk, then the court, the state can compel them to appear because it's a very critical moment. So all of this has been sabotaged through the machinations of Judge James Bonifant. I've pointed this out, but he's doing everything to sabotage me, just in making things difficult, just to still try and impede, obstruct justice. right, and coerce this my acceptance of this plea bargain. On February 2nd, he was talking about me being rigid. He didn't say what it is. And he was like, oh, he was still uh, talking, he was musing about how I'm very rigid, I'm very rigid. Initially, he had claimed that rigidity was a mental illness or delusion. But now he was now stating on February the 2nd that, well, the psychiatrists, two of them have now said that, well, that rigidity is not a mental illness, that I have no mental illness, and so blah, blah, blah. The state was actually asking again for me to go and do another competency evaluation, expressing concerns of a man. I have more education than Judge James Bonifant. I went to better schools than him. Than I have than also the state attorney, than the at least the previous public defender, this previous state attorney. What's her name? Thea Zumwalt. I don't know where this new state attorney went to school. Right? I have more, but I'm sure I have more university education than them. I have 16 years of university education. Right? Apart from my education from work, from professions, right? The places I worked at the banks, Bank of America, we had, they had the programs that they sent me to, the certifications, the DOD, the Department of the Navy, they sent me to school again, right? I work every day. They sent me to classes. That's what they were sending me to do again, right? So I have so much education. Now, they don't think I'm able to make to self-govern myself in a courtroom, even though I'm qualified, right? I have a law degree. Then what would somebody who is an underage person, a high school dropout who comes from a marginalized community, how will he defend his rights, ensure his rights in a courtroom? If I'm an adult, independent adult with a law degree, with my sort of background, if I'm having the state attorney and the judge gaslight me using all sorts of tricks, and you have a co-opted public defender office, how are they protected? They're not. And we're seeing all these. So I've started paying attention to uh, judicial misconduct in the news. And was it in September 2024? There was a Kentucky judge that was killed in his office in the courthouse by the county sheriff. I think it's called Letcher County in Kentucky. Right, the name of the sheriff who killed him was Sheriff, Steins, was Judge Mullins of Kentucky, right? I think Letcher County is the name. And then it turns out, that was a crazy thing. Nobody should kill anybody, right? Nobody should be killing anybody. It's a heinous crime. But then a lot of stuff came out that both of them were actually buddies and had been engaged in some kind of shady stuff, right? A lot of news now came out, although the guy is, of course, claiming an insanity, uh, making an insanity defense. That's the claim in the news. I don't know how true that is, but things came out that the judge was shady. The judge and the sheriff were involved in shady things in a shady past, including extorting sex from inmates, people under arrest. There was a deputy, the deputy of the sheriff. His name was Fields. Apparently, the deputy sheriff called Fields had been he was in prison. I don't know if he's still in prison, but he should have a long term for extorting sex. He was convicted of rape and bigamy, rape and sodomy of these inmates. It was that they gave, there were claims that inmates and females under arrest were sexually abused in the judge's chambers, like in a bathroom in the inside the judge's chambers, right? And that deputy sheriff called Fields, he was convicted. Can you imagine that? So they said that that they were extorting inmates for sex in order to have favorable treatment. while I was, wrongfully detained, wrongfully, illegally detained and committed for a competency evaluation at a hospital. I was in a co-ed, whatever. So I used the time to start investigating because I write. I write. I use the time to do investigative journalism. I was friendly with the patients, and one of them. So it's people who have been. Maryland has this bad policy that when they arrest people and the judge just orders a competency evaluation, which is illegal and arbitrary. Right? It's arbitrary because when you're arrested, you still have their rights that you still have, or when you're accused, you're charged with a crime, there are rights that you still have because you're innocent until proven guilty. In Maryland, then the judges then commit fraud, like Judge James Bonifant. He commits fraud and writes falsely that, oh, this person is delusional, that they're committing, manifesting whatever, when he's not a psychiatrist. So they first ask you to volunteer to go and do it, because that was what they were asking me. He asked me to volunteer. I said no. He asked me to go and volunteer and go and see a psychiatrist. I said, I'm not going to do that. That's my constitutional right. I don't have a mental illness. My family said I don't have a mental illness. I'm not going to do that. If I go and see a psychiatrist, there's something called Pygmalion effect, right? He or iatrogenic effects. That private psychiatrist who come that you're going to, he automatically, whom you went to voluntarily, he automatically assumes that, okay, that you're ill, there's something wrong with you, that's why you came to him. And psychiatrists get paid for administering drugs, writing medication. They don't get paid for saying people are not mentally ill, right? They don't get paid for doing that. In this case, I was lucky. It turned out that the psychiatric hospital that I was sent to for evaluation. Fortunately, because I guess they're either way they're paid, the evaluators, the psychiatrists, because they work for the state, the public. So it doesn't matter if they tell the truth or if they say he has a mental illness or he doesn't have a mental illness. This one says no, he has no mental illness, that I have no mental illness. So Judge Bonifant has been committing fraud on the court, abusing power, and this is wrong, right? This is so wrong. Um, no judge again should be judged in his own cause. Again, that's the legal principle of natural justice, a core principle of natural justice. That's nemo judex in causa sua. He's been violating that principle, and of course, he's been abusing process. Right? He's been abusing, the process to obstruct justice. Right? That's what he's been doing. And so you see this judge, the judge I was also talking about, you're seeing instances of the corruption in the state courts, the county courts, like the that which happened with the Judge Mullins. Judge Mullins is not alive to defend himself now, but now after his death, they were now revealing that, okay, he was part of of a scheme that actually made the lockup, right, as they called it, a form of brothel to extort sex from inmates, right? And then so I was saying, talking about a female I met at a hospital, and she told me, this is what she told me. I wasn't giving her legal advice, but she was just telling me, she assumed she was my friend, and she was telling me what happened to her, about how two corrections officers raped her while she was asleep in jail. She was a beautiful young woman. I felt so sorry for her. And you see how so easily black women can, be locked up. She was a black woman, beautiful. She was a model. She had been a model. Very beautiful woman. Very intelligent, very clever. She's a graduate. She was dating a white guy. The white guy called cops on her. So he had gotten a restraining order for her baby daddy, older man. She's in her 20s. This man's old enough to be her grandfather, the guy that she was dating. Old enough to be a grandfather. And so the guy called cops on her. So she was terrified. And so they ended up, chasing her. They locked her up and everything. She said she's very beautiful, right? She said they where did they locked her up, the corrections officer, while she was sleeping, you know, that they raped her. But what's she gonna do? Because if she says it, they'll just say she's delusional. They'll say she's delusional. That's what they'll lie. And these are things, what we're seeing from this Judge Mullins case, right? We're seeing how the state works with law enforcement in some of these counties and abuse the authority. And this is what I'm experiencing. I'm not a female, but I'm seeing Judge Bonifant abusing his power to cover up police misconduct. An illegal act occurred to me. In fact, it was an armed robbery under color of law in my home. The police ended up stealing my cash. They stole my certificate of naturalization, which is actually a felony, and they denied it. Who else removed me from my home? They should have taken responsibility for everything. That, okay, this is my home. They knew that was my home. They went to falsify their record saying I was a homeless person. Falsified all sorts of stuff. And it's on record. The state knows this. And they're obstructing justice, pursuing a malicious prosecution. The prosecution is just intended to block the prosecution of the cops and to obstruct cases, federal government cases in which I was involved in which I exposed the fraud of some senior Department of Defense and Department of Navy officials. They were ongoing. They were committing misconduct, and that's my constitutional right to petition the government. And I'm working well for our process, but we have a crooked judge in Judge Bonifant, who somehow he's been bribed. By the way, something else happened, but I couldn't prove that. So Jide Wari, while I was locked up, it was almost 3 years ago. That time I was locked up wrongfully. He hired a private attorney who had himself once been a prosecutor, right? He hired him, and that guy at one time now asked me, tried to extort money from me, saying, well, if I bribe the state and the judge, the case will go away. So I was hearing this. There's no way for me to prove this, right? The man that had been already presented to that was his scheme to misrepresent to the judge, to the state, that he's delusional. So anything I say, I'll just say it's part of his delusion. Me that I have no history of delusion, right? Me that I was actually an auditor. They hire me because of my good judgment. Man, they just make those false claims. That's how they perpetrate their extortion schemes in Montgomery County under Judge James Bonifant, right? And they have state attorneys that work together with them. So I pointed out on October 31, 2023, that this man's dishonest, because I decided to fire him, that, I can't have him as my attorney, because all he was trying to do was he was making misrepresentations. He was also trying to extort my family in Nigeria, lying to my mother, right? At one time, even the judge, so they have this scheme. At one time, Judge Bonifant ordered him to get a power of attorney over me. Why? If an attorney gets power of attorney over you, an attorney who's representing to the judge that you're delusional, that you have no capacity. If you're delusional, you have no capacity to make your own decisions. He can extort all your assets, take over all your assets. And this is also something that they were doing. There's a there's a recent court abuse case. It's an abuse by a judge, a district judge and it's sad that this woman is black, that this person is black. A district judge in Detroit, a Detroit judge. It's in the news that she was using her position as a judge to embezzle money from incapacitated people, because there's something called probate courts. And when I was a financial advisor, I would suspect and I'd be concerned of instances like that, because somebody has power of attorney over you, or a ward, somebody who's there's a guardian, and so they're the ones who make decisions about their money. But it has to go through a court or a judge, and so this judge was in the scheme with these fiduciary agencies, these agencies or whatever, right? And some other private attorneys, and they were embezzling money from these disabled people, right? And so if I'd given, who knows if that was what Judge Bonifant was trying to do when he ordered power of attorney over me when I was in jail. I refused to give power of attorney. I said, no, I'm not giving you anything. I refused it. You can hold me in jail for whatever. He's Judge James Bonifant is so corrupt. But it's a scheme, it's a racket they have. And so you see these are things that are going on and it's bad. This is not what America is about. And it's not that I'm trying to tarnish, the image. The preamble of our Constitution says, the goal is to create a more perfect union. And so every time we're not there yet, but we shouldn't sweep things that we see under the rug, or we should window dress uh, a corrupt process or something that's, there's no transparency or accountability in this process, right? It's putrid. What I'm seeing in Montgomery County is putrid. And even though they have all these processes to make it look like there are checks and balances as accountability, they're just token. They're just acts of tokenism. They're just it's just they don't work because if I'm if they say, well, if I think I'm having an impartial a judge that's partial or biased, then I have a right to ask for his recusal. So if I do that and I file a motion and asking for his recusal, and that judge I'm saying is partial, has a conflict of interest, or he's biased and violates my rights to a fair legal process. If he's the one who's making the decision and saying, well, he's not biased, which is what Judge Bonifant did, right? In 2024, I'd filed something for him to recuse himself about because of bias and conflict of interest. And he just said, oh, he forgot, just because he forgot to mention that, well, he was associated with this hospital, that hospital, which I said. So he admitted it. But he lied. He tried to, he made a suspicious comment to misrepresent like he was no longer involved, associated with the hospital, which is not true. And then he said, and then he just rambled. He rambled in a sheepish manner. And then he said, oh, but he's not biased, and so he denies it. How can you, again, that violates what I just said, the principle of nemo judex in causa sua, right? No one should be judged in their own cause, right? Right? You can't be, an accused person can't be the judge, in their own trial or in their own, in their own matter. So it's so unfortunate what I'm seeing and I'm experiencing, and this is my objective to draw attention, that let the public, because we have our democracy in America is participatory, right, and everything is based on the rule of law. Nobody is above the law. Not a king. We don't have kings in America, but not a judge either, right? Our president isn't above the law, right? We saw he went to trial and all that stuff. There was an outcome, there was a verdict, and judges as well. Judges are supposed to be held accountable. If there's instances of public corruption, it's actually prosecuted by the Department of Justice. States also have mechanisms for investigating and prosecuting judges. But right now, what I'm seeing is it's like they're sham, they're ineffective. I don't want to believe that, or even think that lawyers, that there's a racket of corrupt lawyers entrenched in the system in Maryland. I hope that's not the case. We often think that, well, judges who misbehave and are convicted, these are rare. That they're outliers. That they're not the rule. It's not the norm. But we're seeing where the the circuit administrative judge of Montgomery County, all right, I'm an upstanding person. And what they can try and do is try to discredit me. This is what they've been trying to do, right? Discredit me. But that's not the case. My history, my background shows I'm not a criminal, but they've tried to misrepresent things. And when I'm seeing how a judge who's supposed to be a custodian and uphold the process, defend our Constitution, uh, when we're seeing him engaging in an abusive process, right? And I'm petitioning, and this is still being sabotaged, right? Violating my constitutional right, desecrating our American values and our Constitution. There should be an outrage. This is terrible. It's not good for America. It's not good for our image, right? In fact, the judge, I was quoting to him. Um, I was telling him about my protections in the First Amendment, because the First Amendment also, there's an implicit right it protects: your right to privacy, your rights of autonomy, your right to self-govern, your freedom of thought, conscience, beliefs, and religion, right? So when he says I'm rigid, right? Well, whatever rigidity, your opinions, your beliefs, those are things you hold on to, and it's your right to hold on to them fast, right? Just like Americans, our founding fathers wanted our independence from England, right? Obviously, how would England have viewed them? The king would have viewed them as rigid because they had these beliefs that all men are created equal. That was not the belief. In fact, Bertram, right? Jeremy Bertram, was it like I always sometimes I was is his name Bertram or Bentham? I'll correct it. He and John Lind, who wrote answers, unofficial answers, responses to the Declaration of Independence by Thomas Jefferson. They claimed the founding fathers were delusional, right? Because they had these beliefs. Well, those whatever delusion, whatever, uh, it's not scientific, and it's also protected in by the First Amendment. That's why we have the Bill of Rights. We're allowed to have our beliefs, right? He said I'm rigid. He was referring, that's Judge Bonifant. He was referring to my rigidity because of saying I was rigid because I refused to take a plea bargain. I refused to let them suppress evidence of police misconduct, right? That's my defense. That's my entitled, that's my right, my constitutional right. So I expressed my constitutional rights. He actually said on February 2, 2026, it was terrible. He said it sheepishly. I think I have these rights, these constitutional rights, but he thinks he thinks not. He doesn't think I have these constitutional rights that he's talking about. That's a violation of my rights. That means he doesn't believe in the Constitution, or he thinks me as a black person or African that I have no right to be an American citizen, that I don't have equal rights of an American citizen. I don't know what he meant. I didn't ask him. But you see, that's a judge who doesn't even believe in upholding our Constitution. So that violates my equal protection of the laws clause, the 14th Amendment. Or he doesn't, but maybe because he's a Southern judge, he doesn't believe in it. Actually, after all, this is the same state, you know, James Taney. He might have shared the same views of Roger Taney, not James Taney, Justice Roger Taney, who made the infamous Dred Scott decision, in the case, Sanford, you know, uh, Dred Scott versus Sanford, where Chief Justice Taney said, well, African people of African descent, African Americans, they know that they're not American citizens and they have no rights that a white man is obligated to protect. Maybe that's what Judge Bonifant was sheepishly saying on February 2, 2026. When I talked about my constitutional rights, I quoted the First Amendment to him, talked about how it protected my rights to my conscience, my beliefs, my religion. And he said, oh, that I say I have these rights, but he does not think so, right? So he shares the Dred Scott belief like a racist. He might be, look, all the things he's been doing points to racism and xenophobia, the bias, the irrational bias, because he's not upholding the rule of law, my rights. He's been violating my rights. What happened to me in my own home, May 16, 2026, was a hate crime. The public defender sent me uh, discovery, right? Discovery should be evidence that they have against me. She's showing me, after the police had assaulted me, when I'm in the hospital and I'm handcuffed, I'm bloodied, and I'm completely naked, prostrate, right, on a gurney, I'm naked in the lobby in public where everybody's coming and seeing me, right? That's a sexual assault. That's an obscene, a violation of my rights by making a pornographic material of me. That's actually a federal crime. I hope the federal government pursues justice against these criminals, right? Imagine if it had been a woman that they removed from her home, naked, completely naked, in handcuffs, and then dump her in a hospital, and then they write false stuff. You write a false report that he was a homeless person who's psychotic to make it look like, well, the person willingly went out naked, and they just left me out there naked. Imagine if it's a woman, she's spread eagled in handcuffs, all bloodied, a white woman in the lobby of a hospital, and everybody, police officers, patients, they're looking at her naked body in a hospital. Wouldn't there be an outrage? This is what they want us to show the world. And I'm very eager. Let's go ahead and show it to a jury. But, in Montgomery County, for indications, they probably think black people are animals. The police officer used racial epithets. The racist Jeffrey Ray called me an animal, lied, told all sorts of lies. They know that he's fabricated evidence. The barbaric cop said after they tased me, he lied, right? That he wasn't the one that tased me, that he had his gun, that he was getting ready to kill me, saying I was an animal, using racial epithets, right? But that each time he wanted to kill me with his Glock, that somebody else would taser me. He said this in a court proceeding. He was committing perjury. And then he said after they tasered me, he was saying, oh, that I was so strong, like describing a beast. He was just talking about me being so strong. I got up, ran inside my apartment, locked the door, and I started masturbating on my counter. That was what he said. Okay, show me. On that day when they were saying this, I was like, are they describing somebody else? Because nothing like that happened. I'm like, so that's gaslighting. They tell lies. He was committing perjury, and he's not being held accountable. When we looked at the body cam, we found he was one who actually shot me in the head. That's Jeffrey Ray. He shot me in the head with a taser, that not his gun. So his intent was to actually use his Glock to kill me, admitting that was attempted murder. But the state didn't say, oh, we can't prosecute this crime. This man was in his home. There was no arrest warrant. The only excuse that they have for coming was actually they've seen that the emergency evaluation petition by judex was a fabrication, that he lied, he committed perjury. Because at some point, the state charged him, or they'd be suppressing prosecution of the perjury, saying, oh, it's very hard to prove perjury. Right? That maybe judex is just crazy and he has false beliefs. That's what the prosecutor says, that it's hard to prove perjury, even though they've charged him several times. So this is what I'm facing in Montgomery County, Maryland. I'm seeing the injustices in our criminal justice system. It's bad when they say law enforcement are roguish, but it's worse when the actual judges are corrupt as Judge James Bonifant, and they violate that principle again. Nemo, judex, in causa sua. No one should be a judge in their own cause, right? Nemo judex in causa sua. And, for a whole year, the judge prevented me from speaking in court, making a misrepresentation that I was delusional and that I had a mental illness. So I didn't know what was going on for a whole year. And then on February 2026, just a few days ago, he said, no, that I have no mental illness, that the doctor said I have no mental illness. So that's fraud on the courts. That's a reason to have vacated earlier judgment dismissed the case because it's violated my rights. It's 3 years. The uh, public defender was talking about evidence being lost in CCTV that would have proved my innocence. And immediately, that was what I asked them to gather when I was locked up. They never did. It's been 3 years now, and they're saying, "Oh, it's lost." It just destroyed evidence. He's allowed the state to destroy evidence, right? And he violated my right to be heard for over a whole year, right? Audi autem, uh, atrium partem, right? Violating my right to be heard. Anyway, my name is Olurotimi Osha, and I've been talking about the injustices which violate the principles our founding fathers like James Madison enshrined in the Bill of Rights. In this instance, the Sixth Amendment, right to a fair, speedy, and public trial with an impartial jury, and right to obtain, through a compulsory process, witnesses in one's favor, right to counsel. I'm going to still continue and do another video just discussing a case that a case in which Judge Bonifant referred to me trying to speciously argue that if I fire a public defender for being ineffective, I'm entitled to effective counsel. If I fire one, asking, because I was requesting for another attorney because she was trying to give a strategy that was tantamount to sabotaging and suppressing evidence, sabotaging my case, and she'd shown a lack of representation, right, negligence, right. She said, if he said, well, he argued that, well, the court is very busy, that they're overburdened, and so that the public defenders are not many, and so that's why I haven't had effective counsel, and that if I fire one, I was waiving that I don't have a right to another public defender or or attorney unless I represent myself pro se, or and I explained to him that as Abraham Lincoln said, um, a lawyer who represents himself has a fool for a client, right? And they taught me in law school that the foolish lawyer is the one who represents himself in court. And I said, I'm not going to do that. I can support. I wanted to be co-counsel. That was what I was asking. Like, okay, let me be able to support my attorney. There's nothing in the law that says I can't be co-counsel supporting the attorney. But the attorney, I didn't support her strategy. She had no strategy. She hadn't subpoenaed anybody. 1 week to go. I have a right to effective counsel. So he said, well, if I fire that attorney, then that means I'm waiving my rights to an attorney. I said, no, I haven't done that. So he referred me to read a case. He was arguing speciously. So I decided, I read the case. That case actually could, it supports what I said. No, I have a right to effective counsel, right? Unless I knowingly, involuntarily waive that right. And I haven't. I'm saying I haven't. I want another attorney. So the court has something called inherent authority. So that if, one files a public defender, or the public defender says they can't represent the client, right? And the client is indigent. And the judge has inherent authority because I have my right to counsel, right? It's one of those, it's non-derogable. They can't take that away. It's a must in a criminal prosecution. So the judge has inherent authority to now appoint an attorney to support, to assist the the defendant at the state's purse, or at the state's expense. But Judge Bonifant was trying to misstate the law to me, like I'm an ignoramus who can't read. Forgetting I actually graduated from a better law school than he did, right? It's astonishing. And I'm thinking, well, if this can happen to me, if he can be gaslighting and the state attorney gaslighting an educated man who has a law degree like me. What do they do to all these black kids who are high school dropouts who fall into the uh, unfortunately into the quagmire of the criminal justice system? What have they been doing to them? Violating their rights routinely. Anyway, my name is Olurotimi Osha. I'll keep you posted. Thank you.